A quiet autumn of 1987. The small town of St. Eleanor, in the depths of New England, USA, lived a measured life. Here, it was rare for anything to happen that could make national news. The old monastery on the outskirts of the town had stood there for more than 100 years. Its tall stone walls and narrow windows seemed to remember more than any of the local residents. It was from here that one of the darkest and most mysterious stories began, one that for decades stirred the minds of journalists, detectives, and ordinary people. Four nuns, Sister Agnes, Sister Margaret, Sister Lucia, and Sister Eleanor, disappeared without a trace one day. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, not even hints of what had happened. 30 years passed before the truth, hidden in archival folders, diaries, and oral memories, finally came to light. But when it did, the revealed details turned out to be far more frightening and sinister than anyone could have imagined. The atmosphere of the monastery. The monastery of St. Veronica had always seemed cut off from the rest of the town. The tall oak gates, the stone paths leading to a small church and living quarters always evoked respect and even a slight sense of fear. For the residents of St. Eleanor, the monastery was something of a mystery. They knew about the nuns, saw them in shops, at the market, at church festivals, but what happened behind the monastery walls remained unknown. Sister Agnes was the oldest of the four. She was over 60 and had lived in the monastery for more than 40 years. She was known for her strictness, but everyone noted her rare sense of justice. Sister Margaret, on the other hand, was younger, only 33, and was often seen smiling, helping children at the local school. Sister Lucia had arrived from Portugal only 5 years ago. She was known as a quiet and reserved woman who preferred the silence of prayer to any conversations. And Sister Eleanor, the youngest, 24 years old, seemed the embodiment of humility and purity. These four formed the core of the monastery, and it was they who, in the autumn of 1987, seemed to vanish into thin air. The last days. Before the disappearance, police archives preserved records showing that something changed in the monastery at the beginning of October. Several residents reported seeing lights in the monastery windows at unexpected hours of the night, sometimes even closer to dawn. Others claimed they heard strange singing, unlike the usual church hymns. According to the recollections of local watchman John Hammond, on the night of October 3rd, he passed by the monastery and noticed four silhouettes in the garden, illuminated by the dim light of a lantern. They were standing in a circle and whispering something. But when I came closer, everything went silent. I thought it was night prayers, he said years later. Back then, nobody took his words seriously. But after the disappearance, they took on an entirely different meaning. The day of the disappearance. October 4th, 1987, began as usual. At 7 a.m., the monastery bell announced the start of the service. However, by noon, neighbors began to notice something strange. Not a single nun had appeared at the shop where they usually came for groceries. By evening, parish priest Father Daniel knocked on the monastery door. The door turned out to be unlocked. Inside, he found only cold corridors and silence. In the refectory stood unfinished bread. In the rooms, neatly folded belongings. No sign of disorder. No hint that the nuns had prepared to leave the monastery voluntarily. The police arrived the next day. The report stated, 4 women disappeared from the monastery. No signs of forced entry or struggle were found. All personal belongings and documents remained in place. From that moment began the story that would turn into one of the strangest and most frightening cases of the 20th century. The first rumors. In a small town, rumors spread quickly. Some said the nuns had run away, supposedly tired of monastic life. Others claimed they might have been kidnapped by Satanists, a fear especially strong in the 1980s. An old man, Mr. Harrison, told journalists he had seen a strange van near the monastery at night. According to him, two men in long coats were loading something into the vehicle. But this could not be verified. There were no surveillance cameras at the time, and the police treated his words skeptically. But there were even darker versions. Several residents swore they had heard a long, piercing scream coming from the monastery on the night of the disappearance. However, later, they were afraid to repeat those words. They gave the case too grim a tone. The first steps of the police. The investigation was led by Detective Thomas Grayson, an experienced officer who had seen many crimes. Even he was puzzled by this case. No doors forced, no signs of struggle. 4 women vanished as if they had never existed. It defied any logic, he told journalists in 1988. The police checked every possible escape route: the train station, bus routes, even taxis. No one had seen the nuns. Airports, the same silence. The difficulty was also that the monastery stood right at the edge of the forest. And this forest had a bad reputation. The elders claimed that people had been disappearing there since the 19th century. Detectives searched it thoroughly, but without success. One report mentioned a strange discovery. On the forest edge, they found a torn piece of a nun's robe. However, examination showed that the fabric was too clean, as if someone had deliberately placed it there. This began the 30-year story of a dark mystery, which at first seemed like another cold case, but later turned into a shocking revelation. Part 2. The Chronicle of the Investigation and the First Dead Ends Public Pressure. When news spread in St. Eleanor that 4 nuns had disappeared, it caused a real shock. In the small community, everyone knew each other, and the disappearance of such prominent figures could not go unnoticed. By the second day, local residents, journalists from nearby towns, and even several reporters from Boston were gathering at the monastery. Newspapers wrote about the most mysterious disappearance of the decade. For the Catholic community, it was a tragedy. 4 women who had devoted their lives to God had vanished overnight. The police found themselves under pressure. Detective Thomas Grayson received constant calls from the bishopric, the town's mayor, and concerned residents. Everyone demanded quick results, but there were none. The examination of the monastery. Detectives carefully examined every corner of the monastery. In the basement, they found old icons, candles, and church utensils. In the attic, stacks of old letters and records, some dating back to the 1920s. Special attention was given to the rooms of the 4 missing women. Sister Agnes's room was perfectly neat, an open Bible on the table, glasses next to it, as if she had stepped away for just a minute. Sister Margaret's room had letters from relatives neatly folded under the pillow. Lucia's room contained several books in Portuguese and a small silver cross on the table. In Eleanor's room lay an unfinished pencil drawing, a landscape of the monastery garden. There were no signs of struggle or hurried packing in any of the rooms. The only strange detail, in the shared library, investigators found an open prayer book with a note written in red ink in the margins. The light comes from the east. Experts later determined that the handwriting did not belong to any of the 4 nuns. Witnesses and their contradictions. The police questioned dozens of witnesses, but the further the interviews went, the more contradictions arose. A local resident, Mrs. Clark, claimed she saw the nuns at the market on the day of their disappearance, around 10 a.m. But according to reports, they were supposed to be at the monastery at that time. Another witness, a teenager named Billy Hudson, said he saw them at night, walking toward the forest. His testimony was dismissed as fantasy. A truck driver claimed he had given 4 women in gray cloaks a ride to a neighboring town that night, but his descriptions of their clothing and appearance were too vague. The testimonies didn't form a coherent picture. Theories of the investigation. Within a month, several main theories emerged. 1. Voluntary departure. Some officers assumed that the nuns had decided to leave the monastery, possibly under the influence of some new ideas or movement. However, this was contradicted by the fact that all their personal belongings remained in place. 2. Kidnapping, the most obvious theory, but no ransom demand, no notes, no calls ever came. 3. Occult ritual. In the 1980s, the U.S. experienced a real satanic panic. Many believed that secret sects kidnapped people for sacrificial rituals. Several newspapers actively promoted this theory, especially after the strange note about the light from the east was found in the monastery library. 4. Church involvement. The most controversial theory, which only surfaced years later, that the disappearance of the nuns might have been linked to internal conflicts within the diocese. At the time, however, no one dared speak about it. The forest searches. The forest near the monastery was searched for several weeks. Dozens of volunteers, police officers, and even hunters combed it square by square. They found traces of an old campfire, but too old to be connected to the disappearance, a child's shoe, unrelated to the case, and the same torn piece of fabric, which later raised more questions than it answered. The most disturbing thing was that search dogs picked up a trail near the monastery gates, but lost it exactly at the edge of the forest, as if the trail ended there. First dead ends. By January 1988, the case had nearly reached a standstill. Journalists stopped coming, and public interest faded, although for the residents of St. Eleanor, the mystery remained a painful topic. Detective Grayson wrote in one of his reports, "I get the feeling that we're dealing with more than just a disappearance. It seems like someone is deliberately erasing the traces. Everything is too clean, too orderly." But there was no proof. Strange coincidences. In the spring of 1988, a new detail surfaced. In a neighboring state, 2 young women who worked at a Catholic shelter disappeared. The situation resembled the case with the nuns. No signs of struggle, belongings untouched, empty rooms. The police tried to link the 2 cases, but no official connection was ever established. Nevertheless, it fueled rumors that someone was deliberately targeting women from religious communities. Internal documents. 6 months later, the police obtained internal documents from the monastery. Among them was a journal recording visits from priests and guests. The last entry was dated October 2nd, 2 days before the disappearance. It listed the name of a certain Father Mateo. When detectives tried to find out who he was, it turned out that no priest by that name was registered in any diocese. Moreover, none of the neighboring parishes knew a person with that name. This discovery sparked a new wave of speculation. Who was this Father Mateo? An imposter? A wanderer? Or someone who played a key role in the disappearance? Pressure from above. By the summer of 1988, the investigation began to wind down. The official reason, a lack of evidence, and no way to make further progress. But some officers, including Grayson himself, later admitted they felt strong pressure from above. Allegedly, the diocese and influential church figures wanted the case to fade into silence. And so it did. The case of the 4 missing nuns was sent to the archives. However, the town of St. Eleanor never forgot the story. Every year, on October 4th, people gathered at the monastery to light candles and remember the sisters. Part 3. 30 years later. The revival of the investigation. The forgotten case. By 2017, the disappearance of the 4 nuns from St. Eleanor had become almost a legend. Old residents remembered it. From time to time, journalists made small retrospectives, but overall, the case remained dead. Officially, it was listed as unsolved, and the folders with materials were gathering dust in the district police archives. Detective Thomas Grayson, who once led the investigation, had long since retired and lived as a recluse on the outskirts of town. It seemed this story would remain one of those mysteries that never get answered. But everything changed in October 2017. An unexpected discovery. It all began when workers were laying a new power line in the nearby forest. While clearing the area, a bulldozer hit an old, partially collapsed cellar hidden beneath the ground. When the workers looked inside, they were met with a grim surprise. On the floor, among broken wood and rusty metal, lay 4 nuns' robes. They were carefully folded, but heavily decayed by time. On the collar of one of them, they found embroidery with the name Eleanor. News of the discovery spread instantly through the town. Journalists rushed back to St. Eleanor, and the archived case was immediately pulled from the shelves. The return of the old detective. The police assigned the investigation to a young detective, Rachel Bowen, but she insisted on meeting the one person who knew everything about this case, better than anyone, Thomas Grayson. When Bowen arrived at his home, the old detective greeted her grimly. "You're opening this box again for nothing," he said. "Inside it, there aren't answers. There are only more questions." But despite his warnings, he agreed to help. Forensic examination. The robes were sent for forensic analysis. The initial results shocked the investigators. Traces of blood were found on the fabric, though very old. DNA could not be fully extracted, but blood group matching suggested that at least one of the nuns had indeed died. On the hem of one robe, they found remnants of wax and traces of an unknown oil, resembling a substance used in church rituals. These findings turned the case upside down. The disappearance of the nuns could no longer be explained as voluntary departure. Everything pointed to them becoming victims of violence or ritual. Interviews with residents Rachel and Grayson began re-interviewing witnesses. Most of the old residents had already passed away, but their children and grandchildren still remembered the stories passed down in their families. Some recalled that their parents always warned them to stay away from the monastery after that autumn. Others shared rumors that on that night, someone saw bonfires in the forest and heard unusual chants. One recollection stood out, from an elderly man named Mr. Randolph. He claimed that in October 1987, he saw a stranger on the outskirts of town, a tall man in a long coat, asking for directions to the monastery. His accent sounded strange, not local. When the investigators showed Randolph old photographs from the archives, he pointed to one of them. The picture showed a man in a priest's cassock. The caption under the photo read, "Father Mateo. The return of a ghost from the past. Father Mateo." The name Father Mateo resurfaced in the case, the same priest mentioned in the monastery's logs 2 days before the disappearance. But the most frightening part was that this man, according to witness accounts, had also appeared in other places where similar disappearances occurred. Archival notes indicated that in 1986, in a neighboring state, 2 women from a Catholic shelter had vanished without a trace. And there, too, witnesses mentioned a mysterious priest whom no one could identify. Like a ghost, he left behind emptiness and disappearances. A new clue, the diary. In the monastery archives, they found an old, nearly crumbling diary belonging to Sister Lucia. Until now, it had simply gone unnoticed among hundreds of books. The entries were fragmented, but among the prayers and notes, some strange lines stood out. He says the light will come from the east. We must open the gates, but if the gates open, no one will return. Sister Agnes fears him. She says he's not a priest, but a wolf in a cassock. But who will believe her? These words were written shortly before October 1987. A shocking confession. Another unexpected figure emerged. Former monastery watchman John Hammond, now in his 80s. Investigators found him in a nursing home. When Detective Bowen spoke with him, he said in a trembling voice, "I know they didn't leave on their own. I saw them walking into the garden. He was with them. That same man, in the cassock. He was leading them, not the other way around." When asked why he had stayed silent all these years, Hammond replied, "Because they told me. They told me that if I opened my mouth, my family would disappear just like them." These words became a real sensation. a suspicious connection. Investigators turned to the church again, but representatives of the diocese categorically denied that anyone named Father Matteo had ever served in their parishes. Nevertheless, in one of the old registries, they found the name Matteo Salvatore. The record was dated 1975, and next to it was a note: expelled from the order. The reason for the expulsion was not specified in the documents. Why, after so many years, did this man reappear, this time in St. Eleanor? And what role did he play in the disappearance of the 4 nuns? An atmosphere of fear. By 2017, the town was once again gripped by old fears. Journalists camped outside the monastery, which had long been abandoned and stood partially in ruins. Some claimed they saw lights at night, as if someone was lighting candles in the empty windows. Others swore they heard singing that sounded like women's voices. People began whispering again about a curse hanging over the place. The decision to reopen the case. Detective Bowen understood that this wasn't just an old case. It was a story where reality and myth were so deeply intertwined that it was almost impossible to tell one from the other. But the newly found evidence, the robes, the blood, Lucia's diary, the watchman's testimony, all pointed to one thing. This was a crime, and it was connected to a specific person. The name of that person, Father Matteo. And now, 30 years later, the police had to find out whether he had been a real priest, a fanatic, a member of a secret order, or someone far more dangerous. Part 4. The Monastery's Underground and New Grim Findings. The Abandoned Monastery. By the time the case was reopened, the Monastery of St. Veronica had stood empty for over 20 years. Its walls were cracked, the roof partially collapsed, and the windows gaped with darkness. Local teenagers sometimes snuck inside on a dare, but for the most part, people avoided the place. The association with the disappearance of the sisters was too strong. Detective Bowen decided to personally examine the monastery together with forensic experts. Old Detective Grayson, despite his age, insisted on joining them. "You don't understand," he said. "This monastery holds the answers. They're not only in documents, they're here, inside." The underground passages. During the basement inspection, specialists noticed an unusual section of masonry in one of the walls. Several bricks were newer than the rest. When they were removed, a narrow doorway opened, leading into a stone corridor. It turned out there was an entire system of underground tunnels beneath the monastery, unknown until now. According to historians, such catacombs were sometimes built in old monasteries as hiding places during wars. But these corridors looked strange. The walls were covered with symbols carved by something sharp. Many resembled religious signs, but were distorted beyond recognition. The gruesome discovery. In one chamber, resembling a small chapel, they found a stone altar. On it were traces of candle wax and dark stains resembling blood. Nearby lay 4 metal chains attached to the floor. 2 were unfastened, 2 locked. Forensic experts confirmed that the stains were indeed blood. But after 30 years, it was impossible to determine whose blood it was. This discovery completely changed the nature of the case. It was no longer about voluntary departure or even a random kidnapping. Down here, in the monastery's underground, something ritualistic and violent had taken place. Signs of presence. In another underground room, investigators found a wooden box with letters. Most were destroyed by time, but a few could still be read. They were addressed to someone called Mother Sophia and contained strange phrases. "They are ready. 4 pure souls. The gates must be opened by the end of the month. He leads them, and they follow him willingly. They do not understand what they are truly doing." There was no signature, but the handwriting matched the same style found in the prayer book 30 years ago. The one with the note, "The light comes from the east." The shadow of a secret order. Journalists quickly seized on the story. Newspapers and TV reports began suggesting that the disappearance of the nuns was linked to a secret order or sect operating under the church's cover. Some religious history experts proposed a theory. There once existed groups that combined Catholic rituals with occult Eastern practices. Their goal was to open the gates to divine light. But for this, according to their beliefs, pure souls were required, young women devoted to God. This theory fit the sisters' disappearance perfectly. A personal letter. The most shocking find was a letter written by Sister Eleanor herself. In it she wrote, "They say we are chosen, that we must pass the trial. I am afraid, but Sister Lucia says this is the path to salvation. I don't know if it's true. If something happens, let it be known that we did not want to die." These words devastated the investigators. It was the first direct proof that the nuns understood they were involved in something terrifying. The silence of the diocese. When investigators once again turned to the diocese, they were met with silence. Church representatives refused to comment. Moreover, one priest, wishing to remain anonymous, told Rachel Bowen, "You'd better stop. This is not the police's business. This concerns things beyond human understanding." These words only deepened suspicions. A lead in Italy. Unexpectedly, the investigation took an international turn. One expert on religious orders sent Rachel materials from Italy. They mentioned a group known as Ordo Lux Orientis, the Order of the Eastern Light. According to the archives, the order was founded in the 17th century and blended elements of Catholicism with mystical Eastern practices. Its members believed they could open gates to another world and gain divine knowledge. For this, they used young women, considered vessels of purity. The order was officially banned in the 19th century, but rumors suggested its secret branches survived. One of the order's leaders in the 1970s, Matteo Salvatore. The return of the name now, the pieces began to fall into place. Father Matteo, who appeared in St. Eleanor shortly before the disappearance, wasn't a random wanderer. He was connected to the Order of the Eastern Light, and it was he who led the nuns on that fateful night. The final clue. Deep within the monastery's underground, investigators found another room, sealed with bricks. When it was opened, inside lay remains. The bones of 4 people, buried together. By size and form, they could have belonged to women. Beside them lay a chalice, with dried traces of a dark liquid at the bottom. Experts later determined it was wine mixed with blood. The fate of the 4 nuns finally had physical confirmation. They had indeed died in the monastery's underground. But who sacrificed them, and why? Those questions still had no answers. Part 5. The Order of the Eastern Light and the Figure of Matteo, an International Trail. After the discovery of the remains in the monastery's underground, the case took on an international scope. Rachel Bowen and her team began working closely with Italian archivists and historians to uncover the true identity of the mysterious Father Matteo. Documents sent from Rome confirmed. In the 1970s, a man named Matteo Salvatore appeared in the records of the so-called Ordo Lux Orientis. He was described as a charismatic leader with the ability to draw people to him. Italian police reports stated that in 1974, he was expelled from the official church for heresy and ritual practices incompatible with Christian faith. After that, he vanished from public view, and 13 years later, his name surfaced again in St. Eleanor. The archival dossier. Historians found an old dossier compiled by Catholic intelligence. It claimed that the order performed rituals to open the gates, for which pure vessels were required. The process involved symbolic sacrifice. Blood and life had to unite with the wine. This eerily resembled what investigators found in the underground chapel of the monastery of St. Veronica. Even more disturbing was that the documents repeatedly mentioned the number 4. 4 women, 4 vessels, 4 directions of the earth. Interview with Grayson old detective Thomas Grayson, upon hearing these details, looked shaken. He told Rachel, "Now it's clear. We were looking for criminals among men, but we should have been looking among fanatics. This wasn't a kidnapping for money. This was a cult. They believed they were doing God's work." Grayson admitted that even back in 1987, he suspected something like this, but no one would have allowed him to make such a claim officially. "We were ordered to stay silent. They forced us to close our eyes," he said. The Journal from Rome. Meanwhile, Italian colleagues found another clue. In one of the old monasteries, they discovered a journal containing Matteo's personal writings. The last entry was dated September 1987. The text read, "Soon I will open the gates. 4 pure souls are already chosen. America will become the new East, and the light will enter through them." This left little doubt. He was referring to the 4 nuns from St. Eleanor. A witness from the past. Unexpectedly, investigators found a woman claiming to have known Matteo personally. Her name was Isabella Rizzi, a former novice from Italy, now living in New York. She said that in her youth, Matteo possessed incredible charm. He could convince people of anything. Many believed he had a special gift. Isabella said she left the order when she realized that behind his beautiful words hid brutal practices. He spoke of light, but he carried darkness, she said. According to her, Matteo's followers were willing to do anything for him. He knew how to make them feel chosen, and this could explain why the 4 nuns followed him voluntarily. The Church's response. The Catholic Church again found itself in the center of a scandal. Journalists accused it of covering up Matteo's story in 1987. Many believed pressure from the bishopric was what shut down the investigation. Church representatives issued an official statement acknowledging the order's existence in the past, but denying any connection to modern disappearances. Still, public opinion turned against them. People demanded the truth. Dark rituals. Experts on occult movements analyzed the symbols found in the monastery's underground. It turned out they were indeed tied to rituals of opening the gates. According to the order's texts, to complete the rite, 4 women devoted to God had to be sacrificed. Their blood was to be mixed with wine and drunk by the ritual's leader. After this, the cult believed the gates would open and the light would enter. This horrifying description perfectly matched what had been discovered beneath the monastery of St. Veronica. The last piece of the puzzle. The most chilling discovery was a metal plaque found in the underground chamber. Engraved on it were the words, Ex Oriente Lux, Anno Domini MCML XX Xefint. Translation, Light from the East, in the year of our Lord, 1987. This was the order's signature, proof that the ritual had indeed taken place. But where was Matteo? The biggest question remained unanswered. Whoever Father Matteo was, after October 1987, he seemed to vanish. No sightings, no photos, no mentions anywhere. Some claimed he died during the ritual itself. Others believed he fled the country and continued his work elsewhere. But neither the police nor the church could find a single piece of evidence. The new goal of the investigation. Detective Rachel Bowen realized that the fate of the nuns, as horrifying as it was, had become clear. They were victims of a ritual carried out in the monastery's underground. But the main question remained: who exactly was Matteo, and where did he go after the ceremony? The answer to that promised to reveal the darkest part of the mystery. Part 6. Vatican secret documents and the fate of Matteo. A request to the Vatican. After the findings in the monastery's underground were published, the media began pressuring not only local authorities, but also the Catholic Church. Detective Rachel Bowen decided to go further. She sent an official request to the Vatican, demanding the release of any documents connected to Ordo Lux Orientis and the name Matteo Salvatore. The response came a month later. At first, the Vatican tried to avoid compliance, citing archive secrecy, but public pressure was too strong. In the end, access to part of the documents was granted. The Vatican Archive. The documents were chilling. They contained reports confirming that the Order of the Eastern Light had indeed continued to operate secretly until the late 20th century. Moreover, it was linked to the disappearances of young women across Europe. Cases were reported in France, Spain, and Poland. In every case, the pattern was the same. Several young women connected to the church vanished without a trace. And in each case, there were whispers about a mysterious priest who appeared shortly before the disappearances. His name was always different, but the description matched: a tall, slender man with piercing eyes and a strange accent. Matteo's personal file. Among the documents was a dossier dedicated entirely to Matteo Salvatore. According to the records, he was born in Naples in 1940. In his youth, he entered a theological seminary, but displayed an alarming fascination with mysticism and Eastern teachings. He was expelled, but soon found like-minded followers and founded his own brotherhood. In the 1970s, he was accused of organizing secret gatherings involving distorted rituals. He was arrested several times, but was always released. His protectors remained unknown. In 1975, the Vatican officially declared him excommunicated and dangerous to the Church. After that, his trail went cold, until St. Eleanor. The pattern. The archives also contained a list of the order's targets of interest. They included young novices, nuns bound by vows, and women working in Catholic shelters. The profiles matched perfectly with the 4 women from St. Eleanor and other victims across Europe. This meant the case of the 4 nuns was just one part of a much larger story. A shocking statement. One document contained a transcript of an interrogation of a former order member captured in France in 1982. His name was Lucien Moret. He claimed, "We were preparing for his arrival. We called him the Guide. He said the light from the east would cleanse the world. For that, vessels were needed. Always 4. Only 4. The rest are empty." When asked who the Guide was, Lucien replied, "Matteo. But you can't kill him. He always comes back." It sounded like the ravings of a fanatic, but it fit disturbingly well with the case. Interview with Grayson. When Rachel showed these files to old Detective Grayson, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "In 1987, we didn't understand what we were dealing with. Now it's clear, this wasn't just a crime. This was a cult. For them, death wasn't the end. It was the means. And Matteo, he wasn't a man to them. He was a prophet." The mystery of Matteo's disappearance. But the biggest question still had no answer. Where did Matteo go? Some Vatican documents hinted that by the late 1980s, he might have moved to South America. Around the same period, mysterious disappearances of women connected to religious communities were reported there as well. But no proof was ever found. A new witness. Suddenly, a man named Peter McGuire contacted the police. Around 60 years old, he claimed that in his youth he had studied at a seminary in New York. Peter said that once, in 1989, a strange priest came to lecture them about the light coming from the east. His charisma was so powerful that many students were captivated. But Peter remembered him differently. There was something cold, inhuman in his eyes. He spoke of sacrifice, of purity, but it sounded like he wasn't talking about faith. He was talking about power. When shown an old photo of Matteo, McGuire turned pale. That's him, the same man. But if he was in New York in 1989, it means he survived the ritual. A turning point in the investigation. This detail changed everything. Matteo hadn't vanished in 1987. He had continued living and possibly spreading his influence across countries. If true, he could still be alive today. A threat to the present, Rachel Bowen began to fear that the order had not been destroyed. In parts of Europe and Latin America, there were still reports of strange disappearances of women. In every case, there were no bodies, no signs of struggle, as if the story of the four nuns was repeating itself again and again. Was this Mateo's doing? Or had the order continued without him, carrying out his teachings? Final conclusion. Part of the mystery had been solved. The four nuns had become victims of a cult, their lives ending tragically in the monastery's underground. But the most horrifying part was that the story didn't end there. Mateo had likely survived and continued his path, and if he was still alive, his followers could be preparing a new ritual, somewhere, right now. Part 7. The South American Trail and the Final Revelation Traces in Brazil. When Mateo's name resurfaced in the press, researchers from Brazil contacted the police. They said that in the 1990s, in the state of Paraná, a group of novices disappeared from a Catholic shelter. The case was never solved, but archived witness descriptions survived. Shortly before the disappearances, an Italian priest with an unusual accent appeared in the area, delivering sermons about light and sacrifice. The description matched Mateo. This became a new direction for the investigation. If Mateo had indeed moved to South America, he could have continued his work there, among poor communities where church oversight was weaker. Living Echoes. Rachel Bowen received permission to work with Brazilian investigators and traveled to Paraná. There, she met Sister Anna, now an elderly nun who had worked at that same shelter. Sister Anna said in a trembling voice, "I remember him. They called him Father Mateus. He was charming. He spoke so beautifully people cried. But he always sought young girls. He said they were pure. And when they disappeared, I knew he was guilty. But no one believed me." Her words were almost direct confirmation that Mateo had changed his name and continued his path in South America. A threat of repetition. In the Brazilian archives, old newspapers mentioned strange rituals in abandoned chapels, blood traces, candles, and symbols similar to those in the monastery underground were found there. The most disturbing part? One of the symbols showed 4 circles connected by lines. 4 vessels. 4 sacrifices. The same pattern. A witness from the jungle. A Brazilian hunter shared a chilling story with Rachel. In 1993, he accidentally stumbled upon a group of people performing a night ritual in the forest. Among them stood a tall priest in a long black cassock. When Rachel showed the hunter an old photo of Mateo, he didn't hesitate. That's him. Definitely him. But he looked strange, young, as if the years had no power over him. These words echoed the fanatical claims of the order's followers. Mateo cannot be killed. He always returns. Final confirmation of the nun's fate. Despite all the new horrors, one thing was finally established. The forensic analysis of the bones found in the monastery's underground provided conclusive results. Modern DNA testing confirmed the remains belonged to the 4 women. Comparison with distant relatives showed almost a perfect match. The fate of Sister Agnes, Sister Margaret, Sister Lucia, and Sister Eleanor was finally confirmed. They had indeed died in October 1987, sacrificed in the ritual of the Order of the Eastern Light. A devastating revelation. This news shook the public. For the first time in 30 years, the mystery had an answer. But with relief came a new terror. If the Order had continued, if Mateo was still alive, there might have been more victims after them. Their deaths were only the beginning. Interviews with eyewitnesses. Rachel and Grayson recorded dozens of interviews. Elderly residents recalled whispers of secret gatherings in the monastery during the late 80s. Younger generations, raised on rumors, claimed the place was cursed. In St. Eleanor, unofficial tours began, in the footsteps of the missing nuns. But the more people visited the monastery, the more ghost stories arose. Some swore they saw 4 women in white robes standing by the windows at night. Others said they heard crying in the underground tunnels. The story was becoming legend. But for investigators, it remained painfully real. Grayson's personal letter. Shortly before his death in 2019, old Detective Thomas Grayson wrote a letter to Rachel. It read, "I've lived my life with this case, and it became my curse. Now you know the truth. They were murdered. But know this too. Evil doesn't die. It changes faces, names, and cities. As long as people believe in light without darkness, there will be those who bring them darkness disguised as light." Mateo was only a man, but his ideas survived him. Be careful, Rachel. This isn't over. The unanswered question. Yes, the fate of the 4 nuns was now known. Their remains were buried with honor, and St. Eleanor held a memorial ceremony attended by hundreds. But the main question remained. What happened to Mateo? Did he die in the jungles of Brazil, as some claimed? Or is he still alive under another name, preparing a new ritual? Neither the police nor the church could answer. Part 8. Conclusion and Aftertaste. 30 Years of Silence. The story of the 4 nuns from St. Eleanor is not just a criminal case. It's a wound that didn't heal for 30 years. The silence of the church, the inaction of the police, the fear of witnesses, all allowed the mystery to live its own life. And only decades later did light finally shine into the darkness. But that light was far too grim. The fate of Sister Agnes, Sister Margaret, Sister Lucia, and Sister Eleanor was confirmed. They didn't run away. They didn't leave the monastery voluntarily. They became victims of a ritual that, for the fanatics, was a path to light. Their blood was spilled in the underground, which for years concealed its terrible secret. A symbol of fear. Today, the monastery of St. Veronica lies in ruins. Local authorities debate whether to demolish it entirely or turn it into a memorial. But many residents are convinced the place will never be clean. At night, curious visitors still come. Some claim to hear women whispering. Others swear they see silhouettes in white. Even if it's just imagination, it shows how deeply fear has sunk into the town's heart. The monastery became a symbol, a reminder that evil can hide even in the holiest places. Mateo. Man or legend? The most frightening part of the story remains unsolved. The identity of Mateo Salvatore has become shrouded in legend. His followers called him the Guide, the voice of the Eastern Light. He was expelled from the church, cast out of the order, yet he didn't disappear. Instead, his traces surfaced in America, Europe, and South America. Everywhere he appeared, women vanished soon after. Who was he? A charismatic madman? A fanatic lost in his own lies? Or a tool of a secret sect whose roots go deeper than we can imagine? There's no answer. His body was never found. Which means only one thing. Either he died and became a symbol, or he still lives under another name. The curse of the number 4. Researchers note a chilling pattern. Disappearances always occurred in groups of 4. Never less, never more. 4 directions, 4 vessels, 4 sacrifices. The case of St. Eleanor fits this ritualistic pattern perfectly. This proves it wasn't random. It was a carefully planned cult practice. And as long as the cult exists, the threat remains. A personal legacy. For Detective Rachel Bowen, this case became more than just work. It became her personal burden. She secured official recognition that the nuns died at the hands of the cult. She organized their reburial and ensured their names would never be forgotten. But in an interview years later, she admitted, "When I close my eyes, I see them. 4 women in white robes, following a man they trusted. They walked to their deaths, believing they were walking toward salvation. I had to know the truth. But sometimes I wonder, what if the truth isn't the end, but only the beginning?" Echoes today. After the case of the 4 nuns was made public, new testimonies began surfacing from different countries. People reported seeing similar symbols in abandoned chapels. Others said their relatives had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Most disturbing of all, several claimed to have met a priest speaking of light from the east. Coincidence? Or the start of a news cycle? Questions without answers. The story of the four nuns left more questions than answers. Who exactly was Matteo? Was he the leader of the cult or just part of something larger? Is he still alive? And most importantly, are there still those continuing his work today? A legacy of fear. This story is frightening precisely because it feels real. There are no monsters or imaginary demons here. There are people. People who believed in an idea so strongly they were willing to kill for it. Fanaticism, disguised as faith, can create horrors as terrible as wars and plagues. And while we may think such stories are in the past, someone, somewhere, might be preparing the next ritual right now. Final words. 30 years later, the mystery of the four nuns' disappearance has finally been solved. But in solving it, something greater and darker has been revealed. An abyss it's terrifying to look into. That's why this story still makes people argue, speculate, and search for new answers. Because within it lies more than just the death of four women. It's a reminder that evil often hides where we least expect it. Final video note, message to viewers. And what do you think? Was Father Matteo a real person, a charismatic fanatic, or simply the face of a much older and darker cult? Do you believe such orders still exist today? And if so, could they be searching for new victims right now? Share your thoughts in the comments. This story isn't just the past. It may still be unfolding.